Hello, I'm Don Moores, and welcome to Montgomery Week in Review. 2018 has been called the year of the woman in elections. Yet in the Montgomery County primary elections, it seems that fewer women won a place on the general election ballot. Montgomery County left behind. Linna Barnes, associate producer of Montgomery Week in Review, has this story. Many parents complain that their children need more than just facts and figures to attain a complete education. A recent article entitled "Educating the Whole Child" explains what this education might be. Shirley Brandman, who comments on a regular basis for our program, tells us all about this. Some scientists say that the fall of the Roman Empire could be attributed to the Romans using lead pipes for their water supply and ingesting lots and lots of lead. Concern for lead leaching into water pipes continues to this day. Dr. Bruce Fowler, a toxicologist who knows a lot about this, is here to warn us about how lead and our pipes can hurt us. Virtual medicine is an idea that has a long history, from stories of sailors being treated on board ships without a doctor, to more recently medical processes being completed in Antarctica over the internet. Henry Hailstock comments all the time on this show. We wish you were here every week. Is here to comment about how people can rise to a crisis when needed. Linna Barnes, welcome back, our associate producer, fearless leader, together with our producer, Carla Satensky. I mean, it's kind of a real special thing when you come on, and we wish you were on more, like Henry, if it could be every week. We're talking here today about something that we should be taking the lead on in Montgomery County, and yet we're falling behind.
Well, it's really interesting because you read all the articles about how 2018 is a year of women in politics and elections. You see incumbent candidate after incumbent candidate being defeated by women, often male candidates. Yet here in Montgomery County, that didn't seem to happen in the primary election, speaking primarily of the Democratic ballot, which was the chief one with races.
You know, I remember, was it 15 years ago or so, we came to a point where the state delegation in Annapolis, our state senators, state delegates, we had a majority women at the time by one, or by two, it was 17-15, and I thought that we were leading the way. But all that's kind of receded back, and why is this?
Who knows? I mean, I really don't have an answer for it. It's just really the observation of it. Yes, the General Assembly has changed over the recent years and become less and less female. And
County Council
County Council at one time had, well, when you had Nancy Dasick and totally forgetting, Marilyn Praisner was there then. But anyway, we had a number. I think had 4 women out of the 5.
So we've heard that there's a pent-up interest, that many women have decided that a way to engage is to try and run. But the reality is that there often are some obstacles for women, right? Sometimes women don't have access to the same kind of fundraising. And I think it's probably true. I haven't done the work myself, but if we looked at, for example, in Montgomery County, in the at-large race, the fundraising totals by gender, I would think we would find that men had more access to fundraising.
I think you're certainly right in the county council at-large race, which was one that was going on. I think more men got money there, but you also had District 1 was a race that had 3 credible women candidates,
yes.
And a very young young man won that race. So, and who had the most fundraising?
Right.
He had the largest amount of contributions. In the county executive race, Rose Krasnow was the only woman involved, but she raised a fair amount of money. Yet she came in 3rd after David Blair and Mark Elrich, who ultimately won.
You know, it's all about, even whether it's male or female, getting to be known in the community, getting involved early on before you actually put your name out there to really run. Because if you look at it, the credibility of a lot of people is basically knowing who you are. and
So
what
it's
you have
interesting
done.
because in the District 1 race that Linna is mentioning, right, Reggie Oldeck is somebody who has worked at the county level. Meredith Wellington is somebody who has done a lot of work at the county level. And Asul Gutierrez was in that race, who's been on the school board and represented us in
And nobody had
Annapolis.
ever heard of
And
this
Andrew
person who
Friedson.
won.
He's done some work with the Collaboration Council, but he did not have the kind, I think,
Right.
connections in the community.
He had the connection as far as, I would say, grassroots, and he has done some work that really was to the individuals necessarily. And if you look at the ones that you were mentioning, they're something like the establishment,
Yeah,
so
but
to speak.
well, Henry, you're talking.
And people are trying to turn over to something
And,
that.
and you're
that's
right.
now.
I mean, in some degrees, even looking at the county council race at large, I mean, those were more new people. Gabe, I'm totally forgetting names right now.
Evan Glass,
Evan
Will
Glass,
Jawando.
Will Jawando,
Jawando,
then Hans Reamer was an
He was
incumbent.
there, yeah, he was
But Gabe Alberinos.
Albernos.
Albernos.
Albernos, yeah.
He, so, you know, and that was some diversity too. A Latino, a black man. So that was, yet Marilyn Balcom came in 5th, and she was a woman with, you know, a fair amount of fundraising and
God,
sounding
just wait,
great.
It's a dilemma
just want to say we
because-
just got a little bit over a minute left, so we got to wrap this up.
So I think the challenge is, while at the same time we may not feel that we necessarily want to pick the woman over the man, we do know that when you have a legislative body having various perspectives, and particular
Yes.
perspectives of men and women, does make it better.
Henry's talked about that a lot.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, but the important thing, I think, the lesson learned out of this is that these folks who didn't get it this time, who came in 2nd or 3rd or 4th, will pick themselves up, dust themselves up, and come back.
Well, that's really interesting, Bruce, because I think one of the problems with women is frequently if they run and lose, they don't run again. Many men did. Evan Glass ran again. He has already run one race. So I think that is something that's a lesson, and people that succeed really do it a second time.
It ain't over
One
till it's
smart
over.
thing that happened, and I
5
have to
seconds,
say this,
real quick.
Nancy Farine did the right thing. She waited till all the dust settled, and then she came on to run
Henry,
as
you,
an independent.
Henry, you got to be kidding.
No.
Thank you, Linna. Shirley, welcome.
Thank
back.
you. Thank you.
So we're talking about the whole child.
We are talking about
It seems like we've been talking about the whole child for a long time.
So we have.
But we've got science now.
Well, I think that's what's really different. So what our conversation today is prompted by a recent publication by the Learning Policy Institute called Educating the Whole Child. And they are really looking at what brain science is now teaching us about how young people learn. And I think what is, we'd all maybe had an instinct, but often in education we sort of felt like focusing time on kids' sense of self, the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, that was sort of the fluff, that was sort of the extra, it wasn't primary. And I think what the brain science is really teaching us is you cannot get to the academic mastery. You can't get those learning pathways activated if you don't attend to children's social and emotional development. So what this paper does is really pull together a lot of the research.
Okay.
Can I jump in here about the lead as an antagonist to that very process? If you live in older houses, or if you have copper pipes, let's say with lead solder, there's another player at the table, and it interferes with.
Well, we'll come up-
So when you,
I will get to
Yeah,
this,
we'll
but
get to
I
it,
just wanted to make sure this got filed.
well, it is true that what we're learning about how brains develop is that there are things that interfere. Lead certainly could be one, but also kids who are growing up in poverty, kids who are victims of racism. There are definitely things that cause stress to the brain that we now refer to as toxic stress that we know actually interfere with the ability to learn. So the school environment has to be tailored to take that into account in order to make students available
Well,
to
you
learn.
know, when you were on the board and when we interacted with the NAACP, one of the things we basically said is that we need to look at the whole child in that regard, and a lot of things that affect them in different ways other than the majority at that time need to be taken into consideration, and more administrators, teachers needed to understand that every person is not the same. You can't really teach them the same.
So I think we're at a moment where we have powerful science saying it's not just our instinct, but it's a necessary part, right? That learning is actually social, emotional, and academic combined. And one of the recommendations out of this paper is that for licensing and accreditation of teachers and administrators, they be required to develop the skills to support those competencies.
And I hope at some point they also understand that they need some physical activity as a diversion as well as helping them to develop, because the more physical fit they are, the better they are to accept
I
and
was
learn.
thinking about, 10 years, 15 years ago, maybe even more, the whole linkages to learning
Yes.
approach that came in Montgomery County, where you had these really intensive social work,
Right, this
social
idea of a
workers,
wraparound.
a wraparound, interacting, medical services.
So I think that was when we really began to recognize that schools literally cannot work in isolation, right? You have to be aware of what's happening in the family, what's happening in the community. And now I think where this brief takes it is, not only is that true, not only do we need to engage with parents and have schools feel very welcoming and be very rooted in the community, but literally how we structure the classrooms. Some of the recommendations here are, for example, advisory teams where one adult gets to know students over a course of years, or the kind of looping where you have the same teacher more than 1 year so that you're actually building relationships, having trust, and have somebody attend to your fuller development. Thinking about ways for having teachers work in teams so that they really get to know the students, and recognizing that how we structure the school environment, how we structure the classroom, how we deal with discipline, right? Restorative justice practices as opposed to punitive discipline, that these things have an impact on student perception, and students' perception of how welcome they are, how much they can trust the adults in the room, literally impact how much they're available to learn and absorb.
Two things I like to bring up. One is, have you heard people talk about it and they think it's a phase, but community schools. That's important. It takes encompassing the whole community,
Right.
and the students that are coming to
Which
them.
gets a little bit out of the linkages.
Yeah.
That's what linkages
Right,
are.
Yeah,
but also
supporting
but
this.
Exactly.
But really,
We got-
giving parents a place to come too.
And we
Yes.
got just a minute, so
well,
there's so much to talk about.
We
Okay.
talked about this several years ago, and we used Kennedy High School. When I say we, the NAACP used the Kennedy High School as one of the focal points to doing that, because that was an area that did not have enough social services in that area. Plus, they were getting from their feeder schools, middle schools, students that were below standard. And he had a problem in trying to develop them to a point where they would be successful in high school. So what they did was try to work with them over the summer,
Right.
with the parents
20
as
seconds
well
left.
as volunteer teachers.
So all of that feeds into
Yes.
having the young person's development as the core,
Yes.
and recognizing it isn't just more drilling, it isn't just more curriculum, but there's other things we need to bring in
Yes.
to be successful, and that frankly closing gaps depends on focusing on young people's social and
Yeah,
emotional
one final
and
point,
academic.
5
5 seconds.
Okay, I just wondered, are you aware of any studies that are ongoing to evaluate the effectiveness of these kind of interventions?
Absolutely. There are lots of studies all across the country, and there are some districts that are really ahead.
And you'll talk about those next time.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Shirley.
Thanks.
We'll be right back after this. And we're back. Dr. Bruce Fowler, welcome.
Glad to be here.
We're talking about something right in your wheelhouse
Yeah.
as a toxicologist, talking about lead. Lead now, but lead in the Roman Empire? What's that all about?
Lead and the effects of lead have been around for thousands of years, and people have been poisoned by it in various ways. The Romans are the classic example that's relevant to our situation here in Montgomery County.
That was last week's show.
That was I'm sorry, this is, yeah.
We're in Rockville,
We're in Rockville,
Durwood.
Durwood.
We're not in Ellicott City. Go ahead, keep
Oh,
going.
all right. Anyway, the issue of lead in water fountains, in pipes, and the elevated concentrations that have been measured is important to get on top of. The lessons of history going back to the Romans and the lead pipes. The Romans put in lead pipes in about 60 BC. They started doing it.
It's a great element to work with. I mean, the pipes are easier to move. They're malleable and all that. On that surface it looks great.
Well, the engineer who did this apparently wrote something to the effect that, well, we know this is lead is bad stuff, but on the other hand, it's cheap
So
and
they
easy
knew.
to work with.
Oh, yeah.
So you think they knew then?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, but the idea is, and basically they were making what are called fistulas, which are basically lead pipes that it's like rolling up a newspaper. You can roll the lead out and then roll it up.
Okay.
And they use those fistulas to bring the water from the main aqueducts into the houses. Now these are very useful in that they stamp them with the name of the person who made it, the emperor, the date they did it, and whose house it went into. So from the point of view of the archaeologist, this is just a gold mine.
So we know from the studies then that it was the lead in the pipes that was killing parts
Well,
of the population?
okay, let's go to the toxicology for a moment. Lead is pretty sneaky stuff. It affects basically all organ systems in one degree or another. The one that is of greatest concern right now has to do with learning and
Sure.
effects on that kind of thing.
The old brain.
The old brain. But there are other effects, blood pressure effects, hypertension,
Okay.
kidneys,
Okay.
and gout. Okay, that's another one.
So take us now from the Roman Empire now to here we are in 2018, Montgomery County. And within the United States, what are we looking at in terms of lead?
Well, from the report that I've read from the Bethesda magazine,
That was 2 weeks ago.
That was.
Go ahead, keep going.
He gets me on this. Okay. Well, but it comes down to that they measured water fountains in the county schools.
Right.
Some of them had very high levels, some of them moderately elevated levels. But the long and the short of this is that no amount of lead is good for you.
Right.
So obviously the schools have an interest and are remediating, but where is it coming from? Is there something we can do to get at this?
Well, yes, change all the plumbing.
It's a solder, right?
It's lead solder in the case of most of these places. Copper plumbing with lead solder is probably,
Because
it's still there.
I remembered 25 years ago that this was a topic in Montgomery County schools, and then it was, I think, the water fountains
Right.
that were actually the problem themselves, not the pipes, but the water fountains, and they removed all the water fountains. I remember for a number of years you had the bubblers in
Right.
schools because they hadn't been able to replace them all yet.
They had those fountains had lead chillers in them. They actually had a tank that the water. The problem is if the water sits in, and it's a problem on schools because they're not used every day. Water sits there in contact with the lead, it leaches into the water from the lead source.
And see, the problem I have is
Got about a minute left.
a lot of people don't realize